Hello and welcome to Business Week, the program that brings you top business stories that made the headlines during the course of this week, including special news features and interviews, market data, and much more. Welcome to the show. Well, here's the highlight of the biggest stories we tracked for you over the course of this week on the local front. The Central Bank of Nigeria has directed all banks in the country to publish the names and bank verification number of defaulters of its forex policy. The CBN has also announced its partnership with global fintech company Bitin Corporation as technical partner for its proposed digital currency, which will be known as e-Naira. The Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation has also incurred 756.99 billion naira subsidy for petrol cost from January to July this year. And away from the energy sector now, the Nigerian Exchange has said that the total inflows of foreign portfolio investments declined by 30.91 billion naira from January to July this year compared to the corresponding period of last year. On the international front now, the U.S. Treasury Department says the acquisition of Magnachip Semiconductor Corporation by a Chinese private equity firm poses risks to national security, in another hurdle for Chinese companies trying to invest abroad in critical tech industries. And in China, top securities regulator pledged to crack down on mismanaged private funds and weed out also fake ones as the government becomes more assertive in dealing with an industry worth over 60 trillion yuan, which equates to about 9.2 trillion US dollars. The French economy rebounded slightly more strongly than first thought in the second quarter of this year as consumer spending recovered after a coronavirus lockdown. Now, the Eurozone's second biggest economy grew by 1.1% in 3 months to end of June after showing no growth the previous 3 months, revising the second quarter rate up from 0.9%. The Australian government is also considering new laws that would tighten the regulation of digital payment services by tech giants such as Apple and Alphabet's Google. Well, it's now time to bring you special packages prepared by correspondents now in this first report. In a bid to hasten budget preparation and eventual passage, officers responsible for the expenditure plans drafting in the country's ministries, departments and agencies have had their capacity enhanced. Now, the country's budgetary authorities are hoping this will effectively address challenges that limit the process and speed it up. Lara Folayo has the details.
Budget preparation officers in the country's ministries, departments and agencies been empowered on ways they could improve on their budget drafting efforts. The budgetary authorities identify some of the issues as including the agencies not studying the budget call circular, thereby making mistakes that could have been avoided if relevant sections of the budget were complied with. The Government Integrated Financial Management Information System and Budget Preparation Subsystem forms part of government's public financial management reforms. It was activated in 2017 and has since remained the platform for preparation of budgets. Activities for the 2022 budget's preparation have already commenced through consultations with major revenue-generating agencies, the civil society, the legislature, and the Federal Executive Council.
The 2022 budget for the current administration will focus on completing, as much as possible what it has started. And so new projects, new programs will be de-emphasized. As you know, it will be the last full year budget that the administration will be implementing. So it's a very critical one, for it.
Government expects that the outcome of this engagement will lead to a timely drafting, submission and approval of the 2022 expenditure document as it was for that of the last 2 years.
As we have found from previous experience, those political activities can sometimes interfere with the process of governance. And so we have to really be very deliberate and stay the course and try and front-load execution of the 2022 budget and get as much done early here before these political activities begin to get in the way.
Not less than 4,000 participants from 900 MDAs are being empowered with the needed skills through this training across the country.
And in this next report now, Nigerians have been warned to stop trading in wildlife items and exportation of unprocessed wood, among other contraband goods. Now, this is as the strike force team Zone A of the Nigeria Customs Service intercepted thousands of donkey hides and skin and other export prohibited products valued at more than 600 million naira. In Lagos, TVC News correspondent Ifeanyi reports.
In recent times, Nigeria has become a hotbed for the smuggling of wildlife products, among other export prohibited goods. Showcasing its latest seizures of containers of donkey hides and skin, unprocessed logs of wood, containers filled with sacks of charcoal, among other export goods that are absolute prohibition, the coordinator, Strike Force Team Zone A, warns that trading in such contravenes export guidelines. He underscores the importance of intelligence in tracking the seizures.
We have over 6,000 pieces of donkey skin that was ready for export. That will tell you the amount of donkey that have been killed in this country. Charcoal, unprocessed wood, is banned from exportation. In places where trees are felled, when you fell one, two must be planted. But it's not the case. That is why the type of heat we experience in this country these days, with many people don't know where it's coming from. The desert is fast approaching.
Speaking on the seizure of more than 1,370 bags of foreign parboiled rice, he insists that importation of rice remains a prohibition, while noting that importation of footwear is also an import contravention.
We deploy intelligence to know where these rice are going to be packed. The owners are sleeping in big hotels in their homes. So under the cover of night, we, through intelligence, by intelligence, we trace to their warehouses and evacuate. Destruction of seized goods is meaningless to us, because what we want them to know is for them to suffer, for them to have that pains that they have borrowed money, they have gathered this money, borrowed to bring in these things, and this is seized.
On a daily basis, the smuggling of wildlife articles and unprocessed timber woods are on the increase. But according to Schedule 6 of the Customs Extant Laws, the exportation of these items are absolute prohibitions. The need for Nigerians to desist from actions that could lead to more deforestation of the environment and depletion of the environment's biodiversity has been underscored.
And away from those reports now, we delve deeper into the feature of the show today, looking at mixed reactions following the proposed hike of electricity tariffs in the power sector. We have details of this and much more in this conversation coming up shortly. Many thanks for still staying with us. Let's of today's discourse. The highlight of the week that was the report that Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Commission, that's the NERC, directed electricity distribution companies, DISCOs, to commence the collection of service-based tariff from this month. Now, this is targeted at increasing the cost of electricity by over 50% in order to enable the government end subsidy in the electricity sector. Already, the 11 DISCOs have started to inform their customers who have been calling for improved services and mass deployment of prepaid meters nationwide. It was noted that the increase will be reflected on the energy bill for October this year, which will represent energy consumption for September. And now I would have joining me via Skype to discuss this and much more, Adebowale Adeniyi, the Senior Manager, Oil, Gas and Power Unit of Anderson. Many thanks for joining us on the show today.
Thanks for having me, David.
Now, we've had quite a back and forth over the issue of cost-reflective tariff. Now, the most recent in this regard is a resolution by NERC directing 11 electricity distribution companies to increase their tariffs from the 1st of this month. Now, we saw an initial attempt last September, and then at the start of this year, which we've also seen interventions by Labour as well. What do you make of the lines of engagement so far, the communication and also the economic impact on Nigerians?
Any increase in the tariff of electricity at this time will certainly have a negative economic impact on Nigerians, given the current state of the economy. That was why the labor unions kicked against any increase in electricity tariffs when an attempt was made by the DISCOs in September 2020. That said, it is important to provide some context on the consistent attempt by NERC and the distribution companies to increase electricity tariffs. In line with the provisions of the Electric Power Sector Reform Act, NERC adopted the multi-year tariff order as a methodology for setting electricity tariffs in the country. The idea behind the tariff order is to have a cost-reflective tariff system that will guarantee a fully funded and functional power sector in the country. To ensure that the tariff is cost-reflective, NERC is expected to carry out minor reviews every year and major reviews every 5 years to adjust for changes in parameters such as inflation and movement in exchange rates. The latest minor review was carried out in 2019, and that was the first review that happened since 2015, and it resulted in an increase in end-user tariffs. The implementation of the reviewed tariffs was set to commence in July 2020, but had to be suspended because of the COVID issues in the country. Going by the reports that we have seen in the print media, the labor unions have said the latest attempt to increase electricity tariffs will be resisted. I think it is now important for government to consult widely and get the buy-in of stakeholders before effecting any hike in tariff.
Another argument which questions the validity of the increment in the tariff is the state of power infrastructure, the performance of generating, distribution and transmission companies. Now, the ruling sentiment is that better supply is the only result that can validate any increase. It will be unacceptable to have same erratic power supply and pay more. Your thoughts?
You're spot on, David, because increases in tariff should be contingent on the level and quality of service provided by the distribution companies to electricity consumers. And this much was reflected in the multi-year tariff order issued by NERC sometimes in 2020 that separated electricity customers into new clusters based on expected service levels from the DISCOs. So what you pay as an electricity consumer should be reflective of the number of hours per day of electricity supplied, things like quality of service from the DISCO and the average response time to customer complaints. And in practical terms, I have seen instances where electricity consumers on a certain band validly challenged and sought reimbursement from the DISCO for not providing them with the minimum pre-agreed hours of electricity supplied per day. So with improvements in service levels, it will then be very easy to convince consumers and customers about any, hike in electricity tariff.
Let's now look at the interplay you foresee in the pricing that we are going to look at now as well in terms of metered and unmetered electricity consumers on a larger scale. Clarity definitely can only be achieved if we get rid of the menace of estimated billing and have a better sense of a metering system. Yes, the authorities have tried with initiatives such as the Meter Asset Provider Scheme and much more, but the capacity to close this gap is minimal and the bottlenecks acquiring meters are just inexplicable, or simply said, unbearable. Do you see the prospect of meeting our meter targets on the back of local production volumes?
So with respect to metering, a lot is currently being done to ramp up local production of meters for deployment to unmetered electricity consumers in the country. As you are aware, David, the World Bank and the Central Bank of Nigeria are providing funds to these DISCOs and other operators to close the metering gap, which has been put at around 6 million in the country. So if the national mass metering program is fully implemented and it is adequately funded, the meter targets in the country can be attained within the next 5 years.
And that's looking at our local production?
Absolutely. So if it is funded, the operators in the sectors are well funded, the discos are provided some form of financial support, then most definitely they will be in a position to get the required meters for electricity consumers in the country.
And now it's time to take a perspective look at revisiting the privatization of Nigeria's power sector and making necessary reforms. This is still a burning issue as we speak today. What reforms do you see coming to bear in the nearest future? It's been years and years of the same result. Your thoughts?
You're correct, David. The top to bottom approach of mainly providing on-grid electricity for the whole country has not really yielded, the desired results. Perhaps now would be a good time to change strategy by focusing on the decentralized off-grid power solutions. More focus can then be placed on renewable energy, given the abundance of renewable energy sources in the country. For instance, in this country, we have the feed-in tariffs regulation for renewable energy, and that was issued by NERC sometimes in 2015. That particular regulation can be revisited and it can be expanded to provide incentives for individuals to self-generate their own electricity and to attract investment into renewable energy generation, transmission, and distribution. And frankly, the government has started looking at this direction. You're aware that there's a Solar Power Nigeria initiative that seeks to roll out about 5 million off-grid solar-based connections for households and communities.
And then wrapping up our conversation now, we need to understand better the role of power sector to propel key sectors of the economy as we chart a recovery course meandering through the COVID-19 pandemic and then other shocks we might likely have in the future. What would be the biggest mistake you see still being replicated, and what investment drive do you think or anticipate will help push us through the second half of this year and even into 2022 and 2023 when we see a full economic recovery?
Well, given the importance of the power sector to the growth and development of the country's productive base, government must continue to make investments across the value chain of the power sector. And the challenge really is for the government at this time, given the cash crunch, to make continuous investments in the power sector to bridge the infrastructure gap that has left the country with inadequate electricity supply for the last 40 years. And policy direction is also very critical. Government should also come up with policies that can attract investments from the private sector for the growth and development of the Nigerian power sector. So really, the mistake that the government would make is to be in a position where they would not be able to fund critical infrastructure in the power sector, because we have an infrastructure deficit, and government must try as much as possible to bridge that gap in the power sector.
Thank you very much for your time on the show today, Adebowale Adeniyi. It's been a pleasure speaking with you.
Thanks for having me, David.
Well, just before we go now, here graphic details of selected food price watch for the month of July as prepared by the National Bureau of Statistics. And on that note, this is where we wrap up this edition of Business Week. Many thanks for watching so far. Do enjoy the rest of your weekend. I'm David Alabi. Bye for now.